Welcome, everybody. We're still coming in as we usually do at the top of the hour, but because we have a fair bit of things to address today, including our review of our final ICD submission, I'm going to try to get started. My name is Sarah DeSilvi. I am the Director of Terminology for the Gravity Project, and welcome to the November 12th call. We do have a holiday upcoming, so we're going to try to make the best use of this time. Next slide, please. Thank you for coming. As always, whenever we have a call, participants are muted upon entry. We ask you that you remain muted to avoid background noise. The call is being recorded as always, and it will be available on the Gravity Confluence page following. As you are aware, we do try to make sure that we listen to and respond to the chat throughout the call. Please send any chat comments to everybody so that we can integrate them into the conversation. Just a specific note for today, I'm feeling a little bit sick, and so if my throat, if my voice cracks, I'm sorry, bear with me. We'll try to do our best today. Next slide, please. So this is the common antitrust practices slide that we mention every time. So this is just a point of practice. Next slide, please. We invite everyone on the call, everyone not on the call who you think might want to be part of the work to officially join the project. You can find the link here. It's about to go in the chat, and I forgot to mention that. So aided by our amazing colleague, Sarah Bihal, many of the links we discuss in the call today should come into the chat as able. Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, Margaret Foley. And then if you want to check whether you're already signed up or if members of your organization have signed up, we do have an extensive membership that you can review on the Confluence as well. And then the Confluence is just a vast amount of information about, announcements, project status. You can have a link to the meetings as we've described. You also have links to review some of the technical work that's going on, including meeting minutes from those meetings. There's a lot to be found there, so please go to the Confluence and review as able. Next slide, please. Just another ongoing shout out and gratefulness to all the project founders and all the grants and in-kind support that makes the Gravity Project go. Next slide, please. We always and gratefully are seeking additional sponsors. If you are interested in learning more about sponsorship, there's two different things you can do. You could just email the Gravity Project at emiadvisors.net, or you can visit the Confluence page, and there's information regarding sponsorship there as well. Next slide, please. We do want to formally invite everyone to the action meeting for the technical wings, the HL7 SDOH Fire ID public meetings. They happen on Wednesdays from 3 to 4. Bob Dieterle, our technical director, leads those calls. So if you specifically want to talk about the IG build and working on the technical side and offering your insight, or if there's any individuals from your organization that you feel like should be involved in that work, you can find the meeting calendar at the link there, and then we encourage all to come to those calls. Next slide, please. Just an ongoing pitch for the ACL challenge grant. We've talked about that over time. The letter of intent is due in short order. Next slide, please. The members of this group, both in our executive committee and our strategic advisory committee and the project team, are going to be presenting at the AMIA 2020 virtual symposium. On the Gravity Project work, you can join the symposium if you are attending the conference on a Sunday, believe it or not, from 4 to 5:30 EST. It's going to highlight our project's approach to what we do, a consensus-driven development of coded data elements, And then learning objectives include understanding the value proposition for standardizing SDOH data, which I assume many of you who are on the call already understand. Principles of interoperable electronic data exchange and aggregation across clinical, community-based research and population health systems. To learn more about the AMES Symposium, you can follow the link there. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to briefly touch base on the roadmap and upcoming domains. I'll go through the project schedule. And then Mark has an exciting update on our Gravity USCDI submission status. We're going to review the housing voting results. We're going to do an in-depth review on the ICD-10-CM submission, which hasn't changed significantly since we discussed it last meeting. We're then going to have a formal vote on the submission as a whole. I'm then going to lead us through a brainstorming on some of the areas that need to be augmented in the transportation insecurity, financial strain, education, veteran status, and employment sections, specifically on goals and interventions. And then we'll close with community homework and next steps, as we always do. Next slide, please. Again, this is our very busy roadmap. You can see here we are in early November 2020, working through transportation, financial strain, and demographic elements, closing up, having just finished, and you'll hear the voting tally soon, our housing instability and homelessness and inadequate housing data sets. And looking forward into 2021 with concepts of social isolation, stress, and interpersonal violence. I do want to state that some of these concepts here, such as demographics or interpersonal violence, are placeholders as we gather the correct subject matter experts together. For instance, interpersonal violence contains concepts of violence with elders and intimate partner violence as well. So look forward to that coming to you in the first quarter and early second quarter of 2021. All along underneath, and not underneath on the slide, but in tandem in real life, is the work of the technical team, developing the FIRE RG, developing the reference implementation, and hoping to send the IG to ballot in very shortly in early January. So these things all happen in tandem. Again, looking forward, hopefully, to the pilots kicking off in the late spring, summer of 2021. Next slide, please. So this is just the domains again as we see them in a different way. So you can see everything in the box. We're hoping to get to solidified mostly today in order to be ready for that 12/12 ICD-10 submission. And then going forward, continuing our work on financial strain, education, employment, and veteran status, but focusing not just on diagnoses and questions and answers, but goals and interventions in 2021. And then, as I mentioned, picking up those other domains new and fresh in 2021 as well. Next slide, please. Again, so just to build space, I always try to make sure we have this parking lot. Individuals, please feel free to send ideas for things that should be in the parking lot. Most importantly, I just want to say why these things are here. As we frame our work, and individuals have heard me say this, so we kind of imagine these things in concentric rings. So as we talked about food insecurity, which is the experience of the individual, we want to move forward to talking about food access and neighborhood food security. And then same thing goes with housing issues. So talking about safety in my home or homelessness and housing instability, and moving forward to talking about neighborhood elements. We definitely have wanted to highlight concepts of digital inequity early in our work in 2020, and we definitely look forward to that being part of our work in 2021. Next slide, please. So here we are, it's 11/12. So we're going to hold our consensus vote to finalize the ICD-10-CM submission. Again, I apologize for the focus here. We did want to just have time to level set and make sure everyone was agreed on the direction there. So a pause on some of the build with our domains right now as we just try to get to a consensus on the ICD-10-CM. We do have this placeholder of possibly convening an add-on session. I don't think we'll actually need that because we've been doing so well. 11/26 is canceled because it's a holiday. And then when we come back in December, the goal is to really, in between that time, and you'll hear about this later, get to a point where we can agree and close some of the goals and interventions on some of these domains. Again, I don't think we'll be there with education, veteran status, and employment, but I would like to see if we can get to goals and interventions votes on transportation and financial strain. It's maybe it's not possible, but at least we'll have that as our goal. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the two streams of work again, how the terminology work intersects with the technical work of FIRE. Next slide, please. And then these are our icons that kind of guide us as we move through our slides, because what we've known is that we cover so many different domains in different phases. Just developing kind of icons is like we're in identify now with transportation and security. We're in review now with ICD-10-CM, moving swiftly into vote. And we're in build now with housing instability and homelessness and food insecurity. These icons can help us orient ourselves as we go forward. And again, looking forward to testing and evaluating and then bringing information from that testing and evaluation back into both the terminology build and the technical build in 2021. Next slide, please. Any questions so far? All right, next slide. I believe I passed the mic off to Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. So next slide, please. So some of this is news you already know, but we have some really fabulous updates. We have the Gravity Project, all of you in the community have been working hard to pull things together for a submission to ONC around the United States Core Data for Interoperability. Those submissions were due October 23rd. We folded in all of your great work on the different domains, the gap analysis, the codes, et cetera, and submitted that to ONC. There were also some others who lifted up the Gravity community's work and signed on. So we had the ones that I'm aware of, there may be others that I'm not aware of, but Rod Hochman, who is the president and CEO of Providence St. Joseph Health, submitted a letter to ONC saying that they submitted the Gravity Project's presentation. And then, late breaking news last week, November 4th, ONC decided to categorize the Gravity Project's new SDOH data class as level 2. And I've quoted there in the bullet point what that means to ONC. They found that it was extensive use, sufficient maturity for them to take it to the next level. And in that second bullet point, you see what that means. That level 2 data classes and elements are considered to be a part of the U.S. Core Data for Interoperability version 2. That doesn't mean that ONC has already decided to include it in version 2. It means that that is the prerequisite. That's the next step for ONC to decide to put it out to the public for public comment before making a decision in the middle of 2021. But that's a huge step, and it reflects all of the work that those on this call, the subject matter experts who are working on each of the individual domains, the various committees, the technical committee, advisory committee, the strategic advisory committee, the executive committee, even some of the people who are working directly on this, like Joe Kliegman from the Cambria Grove Fellows, Sarah DeSilvi and Bob Dieterle and Evelyn Gallego. So all of this work has made a huge step forward, and I'm going to quickly illustrate that graphically. Next step, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. So you may have seen this from me before. This is a slide of the various data elements that have been considered by ONC. They released this in 2018, and you'll see that a few were a part of the common clinical data set. Some were considered for possible addition in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Some weren't really even on the list. And social determinants were the ones that weren't really on the list, not scheduled, so-called emerging status. Next slide. So here's what we submitted, and again, this is a floor, not a ceiling. So we submitted the 11 domains that we thought we would have ready by the time the ONC makes its decision. Around the activities in the middle column, using the code sets on the right column, all of this is what we submitted on October 23rd. And next slide. This is the good news that we saw on ONC's website on November 4th, listing for level 2 a new data class of social determinants of health, never before been there. So this is a woohoo moment, I think. Congratulations to all of you on the call. Thanks for all your hard work. This is what we're trying to do to move social determinants of health into action. So great job. Thanks, Sarah. Back to you.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. Just so grateful for the work, especially the work of our Cambia Fellow, Joe, and all that work, and our work of our technical director, Bob Dearly, and then Mark. Just lots and lots of labor, so thank you. And then the community, of course. Thanks for all of your insight. Next slide. So any questions on the USCDI submission? Just lots of nice congratulations that are definitely due. I do want to give specific thanks to our colleague Al Taylor at the ONC, who was instrumental in helping us shape that approach too. Next slide. All right, so a quick review of our housing voting results. Quick slide, next slide, please. These are all of our submitters who helped with the housing data elements, both the housing instability and homelessness data set, and then the inadequate housing data set. Huge gratefulness. Next slide, please. And we reached consensus in favor of the housing instability and homelessness and inadequate housing data sets. Go team. So this means now really, in about a year's time, which seems like it's a long time, but it actually isn't very long, we developed a process in order to adjudicate data elements and have a insecurity data set, a housing instability and homelessness data set, and an inadequate housing data set, representing significant additions to baseline terminology to address these social risks. So thank you so much, everybody. And now we just get to keep on working. Our next steps, as Linda Hyde, our coding expert, is aware, is to work to try to get these elements into the earlier than we anticipated SNOMED CT submission, which is just around the corner. Next slide, please. Any questions there? All right, keep on going. All right, I just want to give a general sense as well. To frame our conversation, there's this kind of new perspective that we use to kind of ground our work. We always reference whatever we're doing with experts in the field. So an agreement that we've established, just make sure that we're not building irresponsibly, is if we touch upon concepts that cross domains, that move from inadequate housing into environmental contamination. Our goal is always just to create a structure that we could expand upon in time, but not forge forward without those subject matter experts in those domains at the table with us, because we just want to make sure that we're building responsible. So again, we always just try to think about the logical structure of these concepts and how they relate to each other, so that we can refine and add in time if needed. Next slide, please. All right. So now we're going to take a little moment and review the ICD-10 submission that's headed for 12.4. I didn't make a slide for this, but I do want to just state a caveat. What we're hoping for in the review and in the voting is basically an approval of the direction. There's still a few things we're actively working on in order to come to agreement with the subject matter experts before 12.4. So nothing will change too significantly based on what you see today. If there are changes, we promise to inform all of you via email and make sure the community is included. But I can't anticipate much changing, but I just do want to admit that we're still actively working on some of these elements. Next slide, please. Big thanks to our subject matter experts. All of these individuals have been volunteering their time. Jen Sisto-Gall, Dr. Ipek Center, Alexandra King, and Michael Adelberg for transportation. Next slide, please. We have refined our definition for transportation insecurity. As you can see here, I say it's in process, but I actually think it's looking pretty good. So the synthesis definition that we have right now is lack of sustainable access to transportation modalities that permit a person to reliably arrive in a safe and timely manner at sites necessary for maintaining that person's health and well-being. This can be due to the inability to utilize available transportation, due to lack of available, reliable, or appropriate transportation, or to inability to afford available transportation. Again, as we work in some of our domains, some of our terminology standards, these definitions are crucial. So this is just a statement of where it stands. And again, it has to be kind of pulled apart by some of our colleagues who work in the technical world. Big, huge thanks to our colleagues at AMA who always help us refine these things. But this is a statement of where we stand right now. Any questions on that? You can see it contains all of those subdomains that we've been talking about. You'll see eventually in the SNOMED build. Next slide. Also thankful for our financial strain subject matter experts, Dr. Adam Chickadams, Dr. Jeffrey Colvin, and Dr. Andrew Pinto. Next slide, please. These definitions have not changed, but I do put them here for grounding. One of the complexities as we've been doing our ICD-10-CM work is, again, broadly speaking, financial strain and financial insecurity is the parent concept under which the domains of food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation insecurity set. So when we think about ICD-10-CM, it's difficult to work that logical relationship into the structure of ICD, how it stands right now. It also presents difficulties when we think about the unique natures of some of these subdomains, because yes, they might be children of financial insecurity, but transportation insecurity, as you saw from the previous slide, has all kinds of subdomains which are specific to the experience of that condition itself. And each of those subdomains of food insecurity, housing instability, and homelessness, et cetera, also have their unique health associations. So there's two different pressures we feel as we go forward with BUILD. One, the existing truth of how these things are related conceptually. Two, the current ICD taxonomy and its limitations or its lack of real estate. So you'll see that as we go forward, which is partly why it's taking a little bit of time. Next slide, please. All right, so here we go. So I am, over the next few slides, going to detail everything we have so far. I felt like it was important to kind of ground the work that's happened before this moment in time, to give everyone everything. And then at the close, we're going to move to a vote. And in that vote, we will be voting on just the ICD that's new, but as a comprehensive set. But here we stand. So this is what we've done over the last year. Underneath ZP 9.4, we've broken apart this meta code of lack of adequate food and safe drinking water, which is the only thing that stands there now. Anything in italics and not bold is what exists. Anything that's bold is what we're suggesting. So we both broke apart lack of adequate food and safe drinking water into two different concepts, lack of adequate food and lack of safe drinking water. This is actually ICD that mirrors international ICD. We then suggested a specific code for food insecurity, including severity strata of food insecurity, which was a request of the community in order to direct services. This again mirrors things you'll see in other areas and other domains because we want to represent risk. And we also want to be able to triage and focus our interventions where they might be most needed. Next slide, please. Then we move to this, some of the concepts we just voted on. You can see we are asking for further clarification under the Z59.0 concept, one for sheltered homelessness, one for unsheltered homelessness, and then one which would be just ICD standard operating orders, where if you specify things, you have to build an unspecified code as well. So again, the sheltered and unsheltered allows for specific interventions based on the experience of the individual and stratification for risk. The next section you can see is Z59.8. This is underneath that Z59 tree, which contains a host of things in the social risk category because that's where they logically belong. So again, we just voted on this last time, but you can see we asked for specific concepts for housing instability housed, which represent the risks of not being homeless, of being housed, but housed with imminent risk of homelessness or housing with a history of homelessness. And so I have the same error here, so I'm sorry. This Z59.8X2 should be housing instability housed history of homelessness. I don't know how that got on there, but this is from our work with our housing instability and homelessness deck. Next slide, please. So this is when we move, again, still under Z59 into some of our newer concepts. So we're specifically asking for an ICD-10-CM code for transportation insecurity. We are specifically asking for a code for financial insecurity, which is currently we're framing as not elsewhere classified because it would be a concept to cover all experiences of food insecurity that are not currently specified in other areas of our requested build or existing build. So if an individual is having a hard time paying for childcare, or if an individual is just experiencing financial strain, you can see this in many of the questions that we've been talking about as screening questions and answers, such as the Cardia screen, right? How difficult is it for you to pay for? And then you answer a level of difficulty. So that's not a specific domain per se, it's a perception of difficulty, which would be best housed underneath this financial insecurity, not elsewhere classified ICD. And then material hardship, we're still persisting with suggesting this, going back and forth about whether or not it would be a child of financial insecurity. Yeah, I'll answer that question in a second, Mike. So the material hardship would be when you are not able to afford the thing specifically. So it's not just difficulty. We think about the prepare tool, which asks about not being able to afford critical items such as childcare and elements like that. So Mike is asking, do we have an option other than not elsewhere classified? It's true that routine clinical practice use of NEX is pretty uneven. We are going back and forth about how best to, again, this is why it's in red, about how best to classify that. The difficulty is we do need to specify that this does not cover any of the other concepts that are more specifically addressed elsewhere. So in ICD-10-CM speak, we need to be clear that if you're coding food insecurity, it's coded in food insecurity. If you're coding homelessness, it's coded in homelessness. So financial insecurity, and again, so this is why these are red. I mean, because this specifically, we're working with our colleagues at AHIMA and with our SMEs to try to figure out, but this concept will be represented. So Mike is saying, yes, the ropes are a problem as they might come from other trees. Yes, so this is the complexity that we face in, again, trying to, as I was mentioning, the pressures that we are faced in these instances are, again, trying to build lots of new concepts into a really dense section of the taxonomy that does not have very much room and wasn't organized logically with these social risk concepts in mind. So final exact formulation to be determined, but these are the concepts we're trying to represent. Any other questions? All right. And again, because the goal is to have people code as specifically as possible. So if you can use this more specific code, the desire to do so is there. Next slide, please. Then this is a section that we've touched upon briefly in financial strain, but it's important to cover here. So this is covering elements of how financial hardship affects the plan of care. We mentioned that there was some work to do to ensure that this was the correct place to put these concepts, and we really have worked with our colleagues to agree that it is. So there is a route for patients' noncompliance with medical treatment and regimen. All awkwardness and inappropriateness and non-patient-centeredness of noncompliance understood, which as a patient-centered medical home person, it's hard for me to use that word, but it is the word that is in this set. So what we are suggesting from our former submission a bit ago is noncompliance with dietary regimen due to financial hardship. The reason why this is the correct place is there's an existing code for patients' noncompliance with medication regimen due to financial hardship. So anytime a financial issue affects the plan of care, this is where this would be. And now, based on our work with financial strain and financial insecurity, patients' noncompliance with other medication regimens secondary to financial hardship would be the place where a person could document an ability to attend office visits secondary to co-pays and concepts such as that. So we would have, in the end, an issue. We would have the ability to express financial hardships effects on medication adherence, on dietary adherence, and on participation in other elements of the care plan. Any comments here? All right, we're quiet today, or maybe I'm just talking a lot. Okay. Next slide, please. That's all right. I'll get you guys talking in a bit. Here again, so the red concepts are things that are new. We'll be covering in our vote. So we did have pretty broad consensus that there was enough evidence to warrant an addition to problems related to education and literacy with a request for a code for less than high school degree. This is based on the literature of education and health associations and health outcomes. This next concept's a little tricky because we are working with the VA, as I mentioned last time, but there is no code for ICD at present that covers veteran status. The current codes that are used cover deployment. Deployment and veteran status are not the same thing. And there is no concept in ICD at present to map to the SNOMED code for veteran status. So our request would be at this time to create an ICD that would be able to map to that. And Monique, no, there is not. So we will marry with whatever's there. So if I mess something up in my slides, which I probably did, but we'll make sure we match it to the existing taxonomy. So Margaret Foley's asking, are there clear definitions for mild, moderate, and severe food insecurity? Yes, they are. And so we've worked with our colleagues at AHA. So definitions are actually not advised the definitions will be part of the narrative for our submission to ICD-10-CM across all domains. And then we are going to be we're robustly filling out our inclusion terms to help coders as well. GED is an lit equivalent, and again, we mentioned that before, so we should probably go back and fix that. I'm sorry. And is there a reason we use degree rather than literacy? Yes, because literacy is already covered in other areas of the taxonomy. At this point, high school degree is not. So we had to build the concept that is represented in the literature that was absent. So literacy is already there. Is there some guidance somewhere? So Julia, guidance for, okay. Can you do, okay, so there's lots of comments.
It was the same, sorry, it was the same question about food insecurity, like where could you display the definitions even if they're, even if they're somewhere separately, it'd be helpful to like bring them in so you could kind of look at them on the screen and understand what the difference is.
Oh yeah, so I'm so sorry. So so because the food insecurity definitions were approved as part of the food insecurity data set, and we're not voting on them today, we're voting only on new things. I apologize, I didn't bring them forward. What we can do is make sure we have links to those definitions to send around to the community. So we're focusing specifically today on things that we have not voted on and approved yet. But yes, the food insecurity definitions are available on the consulants and in our food insecurity data set, and we will be happy to highlight them if there's any questions or comments. So veteran status is not really a diagnosed condition, is it? I thought, so ICD codes also represent risk factors. If you look at the root there, so personal risk factors not elsewhere classified. So this is where history of military deployment is as well as a risk factor. So this is appropriate to be in that position. There are many risk factors per se that would not be considered diagnoses that are found in areas of ICD-10 CM. What is the difference between lack of adequate food, moderate food insecurity, and severe food insecurity? So that the food insecurity strata are based on the USDA gold standard and the FICE tools. Again, they're represented best in our work on food insecurity that we did in 2019, and we can take you there after the call if we have time. Would there be a similar code for noncompliance due to transportation issues? Eventually in time, we have not gotten there yet. We were thinking for right now, actually I say that, but we were actually thinking that for right now it would be covered in the other concept. I'm sorry, Art. So patient is now a civilian. Yes, Lolita. That would be the they're a veteran. Okay, there's so many questions. It's very exciting. No, Mike is correct. ICD has not sorted risk factors from diagnoses. I think that may be okay as long as we learn that some diagnoses are risk factors. It's not a neat sort, and it's not. How about service member history deployment? Do we have a code? So there is already existing codes for deployment, which is that's all we have right now. We do not have anything to say veteran status. Oh, you're from Firm. Lovely. We already have those concepts, and we discussed them at the last call. But I'm happy to send an email to anybody who would like to see that those existing codes and why this code is kind of filling the gap. So right now we're dealing. So Jim's asking about immediate family history of military service. So at this point, we're still dealing on the experiences of the individual, but we're happy to put family history of military service in our concepts to be addressed in the future. At this present, no, there's not a restriction on which branch of the military they served in. Yes. Whew. Wow. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take a breath. Any questions, any further questions on, okay, so regarding definitions for concepts we've already voted on, we did not include them here at this time, and I'm sorry. I can absolutely help you take anyone who wants to see those to them at this time. I do want to state we're going to talk a little bit about inclusion terms next. So beyond definitions, formal definitions, which are really important for our narrative and for our SNOMED build, we also have inclusion terms we'll talk about it shortly. And then, so Carrie asked an interesting question, sorry, not branches, military in other countries. That's actually an interesting concept. And again, so I think I'm going to save that for a conversation we're having about working with the VA in a couple seconds, because there's actually a whole slide about that. Margaret's saying, from an operational perspective, concerned about the non-compliance, do I code food insecurity and dietary regimen non-compliance due to financial issues? So I would say code what's primary. So again, I'm not a coder, I'm a clinician. So if I was trying to encapsulate what mattered for my patient, I would use the concept that most adequately represented my interventions and my actions. You would use whichever one was more appropriate for that visit. But again, I am not making any coding recommendations because I'm not a certified coder. But that would be my approach. But I do want to say that our colleagues at the AAFP early on in our work asked specifically to have those concepts as part of their work. Mike is saying, I'm a little concerned about how the new ICD terms and future SNOMED terms will be implemented in EHRs and lexicons. Yes, Mike, I actually feel like I feel like that's pretty crucial as well. Oh, sweet. Okay. So, Mike, I think that is in our scope because implementation is part of what we identified as part of our directive, and we would love any assistance in that work as well. And so, Mike, I would say it is in our scope because, yes. Al Taylor sent a message that, so I am wondering, so I'm going to try to get back to that in a second because there's a question about USCDI. So Jane's asking a question about personal history of trauma. So anytime a domain actually is outside of our current scope, I'm going to ask that we put it in the parking lot only because things get complicated really fast. We are talking about interpersonal violence very shortly in the next domains. And then is there a reason so Julia, the only reason we're talking about ICD only right now is because this is headed fast and furious for that 12/4 deadline. In slides in the previous presentation, we've been working on SNOMED in tandem. So everything you see here that's new will also be built into SNOMED, but also a whole lot more. Like for instance, in transportation insecurity, there are only transportation insecurity is going into ICD-10-CM, whereas in SNOMED CT, it's all of the different subdomains that a person might identify in the course of screening and evaluation. Whew. All right. Did I miss anything? I love you guys. This is a very great conversation. Did I miss, okay, I think there's ICD-10, there are lots of special populations. I think one of the things Gravity uncovers in our approach in attempt to be comprehensive is other areas that that integrate and in the Venn diagram experiences of risk of the individual. So again, if you recognize a domain that we're touching upon that is not directly referenced, we have a place for that. We will make a plan, and I promise. All right. We're not going anywhere. You're in it for the long haul, folks. All right. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to try to move along. That was a wonderful conversation. I do want to state this one more code here on this page. We did ask for an original submission, a counseling for socioeconomic factors concept, which was specific again to socioeconomic issues. So in the counseling code section. Hi, Susie Roy can confirm what Sarah just said. We're working with each other on any SNOMED CT submissions. You need to cover the gaps we have identified. Yes, we are, Susie, and we are 100% aiming for that early December submission for all of the things we've approved so far. So it's coming. All right, and again, I'm sorry to focus specifically on ICD-10-CM right now just because of that December 4th deadline. All right. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so just some considerations. Again, this is a review section. So I do want to state that so far, working with the VA interoperability folk, there has been some question on the need for new ICD-10-CM when there's a SNOMED CT code already. So one of the things we've been working on is explaining the use case for ICD and community care. Our payer colleagues are very desirous, of course, of that new code that would more elegantly map to the SNOMED CT code that's already there. We also have had some interesting conversations with the VA about how one's identified as a veteran. And so the reason why this makes me think of the question regarding veterans from other countries, because the VA's preference would be to have all veteran status verified through the Veteran Verification API, and not just through patient history. So just know that we are in active conversation with the interoperability team at the VA and our VA partners, just kind of discussing community-based approaches, why the ICD code might be beneficial, and how we identify veterans through screening patterns akin to other conditions. So I just want to bring those issues to light because we do collaborate with all of our federal partners across every single domain, again, whether it be USDA and food insecurity, HUD with housing instability and homelessness, and now the VA when we're considering veteran status. I also want to state that at this time, we're kind of pausing on moving forward with unemployment because oftentimes in the work in Gravity, we touch upon things that really don't have consistent measurement. This is one of them. So we're very cautious to build something into ICD that we don't have a really clear way of measuring and evaluating. So we're just pausing there. So Lisa's saying, I agree we should maintain a standard verification process and not rely on patient-reported history. So Lisa, yeah, so this is partly why we are making sure we resolve those complexities with the VA before we build anything, because we do want to make sure that we are working with our colleagues. Oh, lovely, Hasna. Thank you so much. Look at, she's also, Hasna's providing an example. Oh, great. So Al's saying the patient-reported approach has been proposed by CDC and NIOSH using a new model called occupational data for health, which includes a new terminology, a fire ID, and an IoD profile. So thank you, Al. And then, lovely. Okay. Thank you, Al Taylor. I'm going to let that conversation happen on the side because they're specifically querying our friend Al. And so I'm going to carry on just to make sure. Next slide, please. I did want to give a thought here just to represent some of the work that we're doing on developing inclusion terms for that ICD-10 submission. Again, what we'll do, and I meant to have it to you all this morning, but probably by the end of the day tomorrow, I'll put the submission as it stands right now on the Confluence page. But part of what we do with inclusion terms is try to give coders examples of what one might see if they were doing a chart abstraction. And so if we think about transportation insecurity, it contains a lot of different things. So these are some of the things we're working on as being part of the inclusion terms or the suggested alternate terms one might see that would cascade up into a transportation insecurity ICD. And these are, you can see these are similar to the subdomains and facets and subconcepts within the transportation insecurity definition that we mentioned earlier. So you're seeing a theme here. There's the meta domain. There's the concepts or subdomains within that meta domain. And then these can be pulled out to be inclusion terms underneath the transportation insecurity concept, or in our build potential SNOMED CT code. That might have been Greek, and I'm really sorry, but you can just see that these concepts relate to some of the SNOMED concepts we've talked about in our previous conversations. And again, you can see them echoed in our definition that we mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. All right, any questions? It looks like we're going to be using most of our time today, or maybe not. Thanks, Al. He just posted a link to the work that everyone's talking about on the side. Next slide. All right, so everything that we highlighted in red is new. Everything that's black on the previous slides was review, but it seems important because all of that's going to the community, to the ICD-10 Coordination Maintenance Committee meeting as part of our December 4th submissions. We wanted to do a refresher. At this time, we're going to have a vote for those concepts that that were new. So the financial insecurity concepts, the education concepts, and the veteran concepts. The only caveat, again, is that if we do not come to consensus with the VA, we might circle back around and see if we can develop more of a case to them to convince them over the next couple of weeks. But we do want to make sure that we work very closely with our federal partners. And the only other thing is there might, that NEC that we're currently using as a placeholder might get resolved in some other way. But again, these baseline concepts will be part of that submission. So here we go. Next slide. So again, these are the new concepts that will be that we're specifically voting on. There's all kinds of extra codes, such as other codes that will be are part of the standard ICD-10-CM build, but the core concepts are transportation insecurity, financial insecurity, material hardship, patient's noncompliance with other medical treatment and regimen secondary to financial hardship, or due, just giving a hat tip there to Monique, less than a high school degree, and personal history of military service. So these are the core new concepts we're hoping to bring to vote in the next bit. Any questions before we go forward with the vote? Because we're hoping to vote as a set based on the fact that we've reviewed these concepts really haven't changed over the last few meetings. Okay, so given that the only comment was on the ODH information model, now going to go forward to the next slide. Again, we are moving from our virtual voting period to live voting to try to arrive at consensus. So we're voting on transportation insecurity, financial strain, and then education and veterans. Next slide, please. Just a reminder on what your vote means. Yes, doesn't mean that it's perfect. It just means that it's better to move forward than block it. Yes, with comments, we always appreciate. So if there's a comment, every single comment is resolved. The comments are always addressed in some fashion in the revision of the deliverable. So we want you to email any comments to gravity@emiadvisors.net at 11 by the 19th if you have comments. A formal objection is it has to include comments. You can't give a formal objection without sending us a reason why. It has to include a path to address the objection in a way that it addresses the known concerns of other members of the project, because we do everything together. So if at this point in time it's like absolutely not, it has to be an absolutely not that represents the complexity of our conversation so far. Again, you have to email the comments to Gravity Project by 11/19, and then you can always abstain. So Mike, we're going, how would the ICD keepers potentially manage resolve the NEC issues? So over the next week, we have meetings with AHIMA and the ICD-10 Coordination and Maintenance Committee to directly address some of these how to build it questions. If anyone wants an individual update after those meetings, I'm happy to send a little update to the community. We have about 2 to 3 hours of meetings with committee members every week to try to get these things finessed correctly. Any questions on the voting process so we can go into our vote? All right. Okay, next slide. So again, this is what we're going to be voting on. There will be a exactly, Bill. So to address the VA, not all U.S. veterans can get care through the VA, but verification of veteran status would occur at application. So I hear you. That's actually a very important concept. So material hardship right now is when the individual does not have the thing. And again, we recognize that that's a complicated term. So it's a difficulty between not being able to having difficulty affording something and not having the thing because you cannot afford it, like not being able to afford childcare versus having difficulty affording childcare. And again, sorry to not include that earlier. It's been a busy week or two. So the poll questions based and revised with your comments from the last attempt is to first have a statement of your status, your member status. Oh, yes, we did discuss personal history of military service. That is the veteran status equivalent. It's the and then so you're first going to comment on your project member status, and then there'll be a vote on the set as it stands. So remember to press submit. So this is pretty important because we didn't have lots of votes submitted last time. So we're going to try. Yeah, so deployment history is already here. I'm for the sake of everybody, while we're voting, I'm going to drop in some of those deployment codes in the chat. So Sarah, if we can have the vote will be coming in. Okay, awesome. How I said good examples, yeah. So the vote should be coming into the chat shortly.
And Sarah?
Yeah?
Will you tell us if we need to scroll down in the chat because there's multiple questions to vote on? That was
yes, yes, I will.
An issue last time.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to get the we did talk about the family members and spouse history to account for stress placed on family members. Right now, we are talking about the experience of the individual, but I agree that that is a separate domain. Again, we think of in our concentric rings about the experience of the individual and the experience of the family member and the experience of the community. But I think we should talk about that in time. So is anyone else seeing the chat, the poll? I don't see it yet.
No.
Oh, here we go. There it is. Just did. So everybody, you can remember there's question 1, which is what is your Gravity project member status? And then question number 2 is on the set of ICD elements. And then do not forget to press submit at the bottom in order to have your vote registered. And then when you do that, there should be a tiny little statement on top of the runtime that says your poll has been submitted. So if you don't see your poll has been submitted under the remaining time, please know that you haven't pressed the submit button. Again, question 1, question 2, and then press submit. And of course, Sarah Bahal, knowing us, made a nice little graphic of a big red arrow and the submit button. And now I'm going to go and find those deployment codes. How's everyone doing on voting? Here I thought that would take not very much time, but oh my Lord. All set. Thanks, Marianne. So I hope folks can see in the comments here, we have a personal history of military deployment, which is a current code in ICD-10-CM, which is Z91.82. But at present, that's the only code we have, and that is not the same thing as being a veteran, right? You can be a veteran and not be deployed. And this is part of the reason why the SNOMED concept for veteran status is not linked to that Z91.82 because they're not equivalent. Oh, Terry says she doesn't have a submit button. You might want to, interesting.
This happened.
If you don't have
you have to scroll down.
Oh, scroll all the way down. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Terry, did that resolve your problem, scrolling down? Oh, I think it must depend on, so does everyone, so Terry, has your issue been resolved? Anyone else having problems voting before we move on? It looks like we're going to go over.
Sarah, this is Evelyn. I had to vote. I'm on my mobile phone. So the submit button is at the top right-hand side if you're doing it on mobile phone.
Oh, okay.
And it works lovely. So just, it's just on the opposite end.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Terry. Does that work for everybody to see? If you do not have, if you can't find the button, just like last time, please put your vote in the chat and we will find it. It's all good. We don't want to cause, we don't want technical issues. We don't want technical issues to bar our consensus. So if you want to vote, or you can email us a vote. And again, I apologize. Anyone having, anyone else need help voting before we go forward? I just want to give space. Al's saying try closing the chat window too. That's a brilliant idea, Al. Makes more room. All right, again, I'm sorry if we're still filling out kinks here. I'm just going to give a little bit of space, but I do want to make sure, are there any of us who are still having difficulty voting before we move into the next bit? So if you're still having a problem voting, we apologize. If you could just put your vote in the chat so that we can make sure we log you and we can cross-check whether you're committed or not. Don't worry about that. We know that information on the behind. All right. Again, I'm sorry. Eventually we'll figure out all these kinks. Some of them are Zoom, so it's hard for me to know how to fix them. But is it okay to move forward into some other elements of work? That's a lot. So 66 of the 84 individuals have submitted a vote. She said that some of them. Thank you. That's all right. So remember, if you have a comment that you want to submit, you need to submit that comment by November 19th. For the sake of time, and again, not seeing any elements in the chat, which we were developing as another voting pathway, or you can send an email if you want to keep it private. I'm going to continue just to represent a couple other concepts before we go, if that's okay. Is that okay for me to move forward? It sounds like, yay. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, thanks, Asha. Hi, Asha. Okay, so, here we go. We're going to keep on moving only because in the rest of our time, I'm hoping to to cover a little bit of a brainstorming work and to bring in some work on goals and interventions that we've been doing. So I imagine Sarah will help negotiate us back to the presentation, or Linda's doing that, so thank you. Okay, thanks everybody. Again, work in progress. I do feel though, we got twice as many votes in that time period as we got in a week in the email version and in the Confluence version. So even with all of the complexities, it still seems a really good way to go forward. And so thank you for participating in that. And so now we're going to briefly, if folks have time, just to stick with me for a little bit longer. I really want your help in a project going forward to try to fill out some of the goals and interventions work for the domains we're working on right now. Next slide, please. Again, thanks everybody for voting. I just want to remind folks of of where we were at with our goals for housing instability and homelessness. I'm going to put this in context. Once again, we are working very closely with our colleagues in other standards work, in other terminology work, and other interoperability work to align our approach to goals across the ecosystem. So this is what we came up with, again, for housing instability and homelessness. And I put this here as a reference, right? So we had the housing insecurity, we had access housing resources, safe sleeping, access permanent housing, accessing shelter, and then staying as I am. The reason why I'm reminding us of this is we haven't had very many submissions for either transportation insecurity for goals or for, and we haven't had any really as we look forward into financial strain, or education or veteran status. And again, goals and interventions work was not the direct focus of our work in this last quarter of 2020 as we tried to get that diagnosis work done. But we do want to keep it going because we do have an obligation to try to make robust data sets for each of our domains. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the things, so Carrie, so one of the things I'm realizing is that there's kind of, there is a logical relationship between the condition we describe, the transportation insecurity, the goal, which is the opposite, the meta goal, which might be the opposite of it, which is transportation security. And then all of those other minor goals are kind of equivalent to the minor subdomains that we've had, we addressed, you could see in our inclusion terms or in our definition. So if you remember when we were defining transportation insecurity, we had concepts of inaccessible or unsafe or reliable or unreliable. So we took the meta concept and then had all these subdomains and subconcepts that described the thing. So really what we did with housing, unbeknownst to ourselves, is really develop goals that address those specific subdomains. So just to get our conversation going and get things going, I started that work on my own. So if you can imagine the meta goal being transportation security, you can imagine always a goal of accessing transportation resources, but you also can imagine minor goals of accessible transportation if the specific subdomain and experience is inaccessible transportation, or safe transportation if the specific experience of transportation insecurity is unsafe transportation. So then you have your meta concept, transportation insecurity. You have all of those subdomains that we saw in our inclusion terms and we saw represented in the definition, and you can see them pulled out into minor goals if the individual wanted to address a specific thing. So this is how I'm trying to get our juices flowing and our wheels turning as we try to build out the goals and interventions work. You also can imagine each of these goals having specific interventions. So if the goal is safe transportation, you can imagine having an intervention that is aligned with the goal and aligned with the diagnosis, which might be a SNOMED term, and that creates that some of the structure we're seeing in our implementation guide. Next slide, please. And so again, you can see that that might play out similarly in financial insecurity. So maybe financial security is your meta goal. Accessing financial resources is kind of an overarching goal. And then maybe accessing health cost assistance program or accessing childcare resources, because again, financial insecurity covers all kinds of elements in financial insecurity that are not addressed yet in other domains. And you can see this is just a rough swath, right? So you have your meta definition, you have your opposite, which is the financial security concept, and you have all these specific subdomains. And if Monique feels like I'm finally getting it, I'm sure she's, because Monique Van Berkem from the AMA and I have been talking about this for some time. And again, these are not things that are submitted. This is just because no one's submitting anything on goals and interventions, even though we've been asking. So I'm trying to get the community thinking about these things so we can really build those robust data sets. And I'm trying to get us thinking about them based on what we know and what we've learned as we've gone forward over the past year. Does this make sense, this framework?
Sarah, this is Evelyn. I'm going to try
Hi.
with not my gravity hat, but with my e-care plan hat. And one thing that we're grappling with in our e-care plan work, in our, as an example, in our diabetes technical expert panel, goals came up this week in regards to being defined as activities as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, they were you know, and I said the framework within gravity has been that the goal is you know, it's something you hope to achieve, but the action around it is defined within the intervention. And they said, well, what about self-identified goals, right? So that was the discussion when I said, you know, that would be a good something to come back to patient care and discuss as part of our goals. But for someone, for example, if they identify the goal of losing weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is for them to walk 30 minutes a day. So you would think, well, that is a SMART goal. You have an activity and a time around it. But as you know, well, how would we define that here? Is that an intervention, the actual walking, or is it the goal?
So one of the things, and again, there's lots of people who are better at this than I am on the call, but one of the things I think we need to think about is whether the walking is an action step rather than a goal, right? So, and again, gravity always finds itself in the middle of these conversations. Again, we just want to make sure that we're doing what we're doing well. And again, there was nothing in these areas until I just threw this stuff up there. But I think these are some of the questions we're trying to resolve as we work with other standards organizations. And these are some of the concepts we need to figure out as we build out the goals in our the goals in our domain sets.
Yeah.
And so we have a couple concepts here. So we have structuring goals around and maybe in a classic way regarding the subdomains of the metadomain, right? So we have again healthcare cost or safety or reliability. So you could imagine sub goals being related to some of the concepts covered by the meta concept of financial insecurity, transportation insecurity, housing instability, et cetera. And then we have to figure out how to resolve some of the goals that are not maybe end states, but activities, right? And this is all work that we're doing in an ecosystem of the e-care plan work and the HL7 community. And I have a specific ask on the next slide. Next slide, please. Sorry, not the next slide. So regarding the slide after that. So I also wanted to highlight get people's wheels spinning regarding common programs that go across all of the different domains. Because again, we have asked in repeated meetings to have folks submit the programs that are relevant to addressing the domain at hand so that we can build our intervention terminology out. And these are just some of the concepts that go along with each of the different that we've carried through because they're kind of universal. And then I have this next slide, I think, which is the ask for the community. So I have a request. So these the meetings that we have here are only meetings that happen every other week. And I feel like there's a lot of experts in this kind of work of goal setting and programs, especially experts in the social work world, the community-based organization world. This is not domain specific. So what I'm hoping is that we can have a little mini work group to really get these concepts dialed out. We can meet weekly or we can meet twice a week, and then we can come and bring those findings back to the community in time for the vote at the next meeting. Because in this instance, I think when we expanded everything to do multiple domains at once, it's perhaps too overwhelming to submit goals and interventions for every single domain. So I'm hoping if individuals can either put, yes, I want to join in the chat, or send an email to gravity@emiadvisors.net and join me. We don't have to meet so late in the day for this work. We'll find a time for the work group to work on this that's not necessarily Thursdays at 4, I promise. And yay, Monique. Okay, fantastic. The idea is that hopefully we can hash out these goals and interventions and programs and then bring them back to the community. Lovely. If anybody else wants to join our merry crew, please just after the meeting's over, please send an email. So thank you so much. And again, we'll put out an email in the community email as well, asking for folks to join that work too. Because specifically, I think we have a framework that we've utilized in past domains that we can build off of. We just need to fill in the blanks with programs, again, and goals aligned on what we've done in the past. Thanks, Lolita.
Sarah,
yeah?
If I can add one comment, I think it was Evelyn that talked about the problem of sometimes determining whether a goal, an intervention can be a goal or an activity can be a goal. I think as we go into this work group, if we kind of try to think about a goal as a state, the state may be that the patient is moderately physically active or, you know, mildly physically active or some defined thing. The measure of that state might be the steps per day or the walking each day a certain distance. You know, I think if we start to mix interventions as the objective of the goal, like walking a certain distance, it's going to be a very slippery slope to separate, you know, a procedure or a service request from a goal.
Yeah, I think, and the great thing is, Monique, is that you were also on the patient care work group call. So I think gravity is part of this conversation. And one of the things we recognized at the HL7 meeting just yesterday, was that just yesterday? Was that
yes,
this is the moment in time to try to sort this out so that we can all do this work intelligently across the ecosystem. And again, if you have friends who want to be part of it as well, like any friends from the Camden Coalition or any friends who are working and wise in the areas of care planning, please let us know, and we'll try to we'll get you involved in this work. All right, I think we're done. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the whole thing, is goals are a key construct as well on the care plan, which is why this work is so crucial to integrate with the work of our e-care plan work, of which Evelyn is a connector and many of us are connectors, and in the work of other works that are happening in HL7 regarding standards. So this is something we all need to get right. Okay, so I think I might need to understand what that means, but so if you can expand on that a little bit more, but we're at next steps, so community homework and next steps. Always catch up as needed on materials and recordings on the Confluence. Always submit our new concepts. Again, we are slim on goals and interventions. So these are programs, professions, and people for transportation insecurity, financial strain, and the demographics. So please submit new concepts. Thanks for voting today. Thanks for coming. I am going to try to understand this comment from Charles as well. Any other comments before we sign off? But I'm not going to end the meeting because I do want to make sure that I understand the comment from Charles Gabriel. No other concepts. So I'm just going to answer. I'm going to try to get into this question. You're free to sign off if you desire. I'm going to stay here and try to figure out this question. So, Charles, can you unmute yourself so we can understand?
Yes, sure. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Nice meeting you virtually.
Yes, I meet you. Can you help me understand what the
yes?
What the question is?
So in case you don't capture the homelessness status by having some cases, a person will change house over a short time.
Yeah.
That's one instance that I think it's critical to capture. The second piece is the location where maybe they change the city and then the city has some exposure to some hazards, event or environmental hazards. Location of a history, especially in a short turnover of changing houses, it's very highly recommended.
You know, so I hope it's okay to call you Charles. So I do want to state that we actually have that concept covered in our SNOMED submission. So history of multiple moves. So we had to make decisions regarding things that we felt like were rising to the level of ICD 10 CM. And I again apologize that for the sake of time, we really focused just on that today. But in our calls, I think at least from since we reviewed the data set for housing instability and homelessness last meeting, if you go to the last meeting, you'll be able to see all of the SNOMED concepts we're asking for housing instability and homelessness, which contain certainly the history of multiple moves element. And the reason why that's part of the set is, again, because of its evidence in the literature of having concerning health associations. So we did try, you don't see it here again because this was just ICD-10-CM, but it is in our request for SNOMED.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you mind sending me the link?
No, I don't mind at all. In fact, I wonder, yeah, so we can try to put it in the chat right now. I don't know, but it's on the Confluence as well. And I think I'll just circle back around, Charles, and send it to you directly. All right. Just to make sure you get it. Any other questions before we sign off?
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hi. Hello, this is Sonali. I was wondering for somebody at risk of homelessness, there is a specific population which is foster kids who are about to turn adults,
Yes.
who often end up being homeless because they really don't have a lot of options at that point. From the point of designing interventions, this may be a very specific population. Would it be helpful to have a specific code that is associated with this population?
So we tried, so I think one of the things that we considered that very carefully. We worked very closely with our friends at HUD to try to build concepts that were representative of homelessness and housing risk across all the different definitions of homelessness, because as you are probably well aware, if you're a youth, if you're a young adult, the definition of homelessness is different than if you're an adult. So we, at this point, what we tried to do, again, because our housing instability domain and our homelessness domain was driven by the work of pediatricians who specialize actually in housing instability and homelessness. So we were lucky on that count, was to include that in the at-risk of homelessness code for now. It might be that that's not sufficient because of it doesn't quite specifically cover that use case well enough, but we hope to be able to test that. We also want to say that we do have doubled up as one of our SNOMED codes as well, because certainly with youth homelessness, living doubled up is something that we know is a proxy for homelessness, and so we tried to include that in our SNOMED build as well. But is that a sufficient answer?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Maybe you could be part of our goals conversation. Any other concepts? Always appreciative of the AND and their awareness and carefulness with these terminology and technical elements. So thank you. Any other elements before we close the meeting? Doesn't sound so. Well, we will miss you because we are not going to be meeting next on Thanksgiving. So we will make sure to keep in touch and send updates. And again, thanks everybody as always for being part of the Gravity community. We are so grateful to everyone, and congratulations on a lot of really amazing work. Looking forward specifically into that ICD-10 submission. Thank you so much, everybody.